Hello, this is Deborah Yah with Black Education TV and Watchman Reports. I had the words of a Gentile come to my mind this morning as I was sitting out here in the garden. This is Shabbat morning. And these words came to my mind. They were spoken to us more than, I'd say, 10 or 15 years ago when we were in Detroit. This Gentile said to us, "Be careful who you help, because the very people that you try to help will hurt you." The reason why he said this is because we had this plan that we were going to be a blessing to our people in the city of Detroit. See, we had this apartment building, and we wanted to fix the building up so that we could help those some who may have been in shelters or had low income and just needed a nice, comfortable, warm place to live. And as we were trying to get things situated, as we were working on the building and fixing it up and all of this, we contacted a Gentile attorney who dealt a lot in property. We wanted to, have an attorney that we can work with when certain issues arose, and also to give us some advice on getting certain things set up, because we wanted to work with local organizations that may be able to refer people to us that needed a place to stay. So you see, our hearts have always been with helping our people because we love our people. I know I do. I remember years ago when I was just a kid, there's a minister who prayed over me, and he told me, he said, "Young lady, you have a spirit of love on you. You have the spirit of the love of Yah on you." And I've always felt that. I've always had an extreme love for our people. I've always cared. Even as a child, I've always cared about our people. And this is before I even knew who we were. But remembering what that pastor, he was actually a pastor in Detroit, and he laid his hands on me, and he spoke over me and said that the spirit of love was on me, the love of the Most High. And so that's confirmation to what I had already been feeling since a very young age. I've always been what some would call pro-black. Although when I was young, I called it pro-brown, because my very first business when I was 17 or 18 years old was called Brown is Beautiful. I went downtown Detroit and I registered that business because, I considered us brown and not black. So that's just a reflection back to where this all began for me. I've always loved my people, and I always will. I know we have some rough things going on in our minds at times, but that's not all of us, But anyway, back to the Gentile. This Gentile spoke these words because as we were trying to get in touch with organizations to refer people to help, to come to us if they needed help, or a place to stay, should I say, this Gentile spoke those words: "Be careful who you help, because the very people you try to help will hurt you." I remember sitting there looking at that Gentile saying to myself, man, I hope what he's saying is not true. I guess I was extremely naive back then. And fast forward today. Well, actually, let me rewind. Before I fast forward, even in that situation, during that time, his words rang true. Let me tell you what happened. There were people that we took into this particular apartment building that most people would not take in. One was a young lady who used to go to my church years prior to that. We grew up together. She was a young lady who grew up in the same church as I did, and her aunt had called me. She found out that we had a building. Her aunt called me and said, so-and-so is in a bad way right now. She's in a shelter with 8 children, and she needs a place to stay. And She said that she and her husband, which they were pastor and first lady, she said that they would pay the, initial deposit or whatever for them to get in, or at least a portion of it, and let her pay the rest. And so, I went to my husband and I explained. I said, well, baby, this was a young lady that I grew up with. And, we went to the same church. And, I know that technically these apartments aren't big enough, but she really needs a place to stay there in a shelter. And I'm thinking about the 8 children that she had at the time. And all we had were studio apartments. These were all studios. So technically, she wasn't supposed to be in there with that many children. And I just explained to my husband, I said, well, baby, it's kind of better than being in a shelter with 8 children, And what happened was we weren't finished working on the upper floors of the building, but on the first floor, we had a number of units that were ready, including a model unit. You know how sometimes you go and look at a place and they'll have a model that's there to show. And so the model was nice. It had furniture in it. We had put everything in this model to make it look nice and comfortable because it was a model. And because she was coming out of a shelter, I said, baby, can we give her the model? So, because she probably can't afford to get furniture and all of this stuff. And so I figured with the model, she would have, at least the furniture and all of that stuff already in the apartment, and not have to worry about those things. There were futon sofas in there, and, I think it was 2 of them. So, that provided at least a place for maybe 4 of the children to sleep. And I just told her she would, have to get the rest of what she may need as far as sleeping goes. So she came. Of course, she was excited, thanking me and everything, because, we were friends growing up in the same church, singing in the same choir, all of that stuff, I was there to witness her healing. But let me tell you what happened. After she gets in, in which she did have an income, she was on welfare, ADC, or what I think it was called ADC at the time. And so that was her source of income. After she gets in, she decides, well, you know what, I'm not paying no rent. First month she didn't pay, I called. I said, okay, you said that you would pay your rent and it's due, so want to go ahead and take care of that? She stopped taking my calls. Second month goes by, so I called her aunt. I said, well, sister so-and-so, she's not paying her rent, and she won't even answer our phone calls anymore, The aunt then starts apologizing to me, and she says, I'm sorry, sister Banks, I'm sorry, because I'm not going to say the young lady's name, she is, up to her old tricks again. So apparently they had already known of some of her ways, how she got the 8 children and all of this, And of course, none of that was mentioned to me, and I probably wouldn't have cared because I was looking at the fact that she had a need at that moment. But anyway, she says she done went out and she bought his and her leather coats for her and her boyfriend. And she says, I've been talking to this girl and she is just not listening. She's not doing what she's supposed to do. And she says, I understand if you and your husband have to do what you have to do. And so, because we're going into the 3rd month now, and she's decided that she's going to do other things with her money instead of paying the rent that she owed us. And other tenants were starting to give us other complaints about other things that she was doing, in which one of the things they were saying that she would put the children out in the hallway and would be having loud sex. Sorry, family, I'm just, explaining the story. Inside that apartment while the children were sitting out in the hall. And tenants were starting to complain that they can hear her. And I said to myself, man, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And so we proceed with the eviction. When we go to court, of course, the attorney who had said to us, be careful who you help because the very people you help will hurt you. That was the attorney that we used for the eviction. Okay. And so I'm saying to myself, man, here we go. Here's case number one, you know. So what ends up happening is she don't show up to court. So, of course, we win the case by default. One of the people who worked for us in the building, the young man who was serving as our manager, he calls us up and let us know. He says the young lady has left. She and her children are gone, but she trashed the apartment. He said they took something and they just, all the ceramic tile that we had on the floor, they just busted it all up and just trashed the apartment. And me and my husband are sitting there looking like, man, this is ridiculous. This is what happens when you help black folk, you know. And then another person in the building, he was a senior. When he came to us, he was walking on his walking stick and everything. He explained his situation, in which his situation was similar. And so we take him in. And what happens with him is different. We had already explained that you can't have anyone living with you and all this different stuff. There's a studio apartment and we need to know who was in the building and all this other stuff. We started getting calls from the manager in the building that he was allowing his nephew to sell drugs out of his apartment. He was allowing his nephew to sell drugs out of his apartment. And so when we confront him about it, his nephew's there. His nephew threatens us. And so we had a manager that was, you know, we used to call him Wyatt Earp because in the city of Detroit, he used to carry his weapon around all the time. He didn't carry it. He used to carry it on his side. He actually had to step in and deal with these people for us until we got the eviction. Till we told them to that he had to be evicted. What ended up happening in that case, the old fella had a alley apartment to where he had one of the big plate glass windows, and his nephew comes and busts the window out because he's so upset that we won't allow him to sell drugs out of our building. You know, our manager at the time called the police and all of this to, you know, have him removed and all of that stuff. But then we had to have the old man removed, evicted, because he was, you know, doing this. And they were destroying our property. And so that's just two of the cases. There were others, you know, people that we had allowed to move into the building that were, you know, doing typical Negro stuff. So fast forward to today. That experience resonates with us yet again. That you have to be very careful who you help, because the very people you try to help will hurt you. They will hurt you. They won't appreciate the blessing that you have been to them, but they will hurt you. All this time, and that message still stands true with the so-called black community. And we just don't get it. And I think at this point, my husband and I are all tapped out. We've discussed this, and he said, this ain't happening again. This is what my husband said. He said, this will not happen again. We have for sure learned our lesson. It gets to a point where you just get tired. You just get tired. And all of this makes perfect sense. Being in the land of our captivity, we still have not learned our lesson as to why Yah has brought us to the place that we're in. We still have not learned our lesson. And so therefore, we will never unify as a people until the Most High does the unification. Of course, you'll have pocket groups here and there that are able to get along. That's always going to be the case. But what I mean as a whole, when you look around this country and around this world, there will never be any unity in the so-called black community. I remember Claude Anderson. Many of you are familiar with him. He said he should have gave up on black folk a long time ago, but he's been fighting for them and still ain't nothing changed. Things have gotten worse. When you have big names like Claude Anderson trying to unify black people on a large scale, I'm talking about a large scale as a whole. I'm not talking about little small pockets, but on a large scale, when you have big name people like Claude Anderson who can't do it, it ain't no point in any of us trying. Because those same spirits that were in us back in the day are still there. Our people are still the same stiff-necked, hard-headed, hateful, deceitful people. Envious and jealous, lying people. Now let me say for the record, family, I'm not talking about all of us, because Yah has always reserved for himself a remnant that are going to be right and righteous. He's always done that. And I thank him for that. He has always had himself a remnant. But as a whole, we see what has befallen our people. And we see that things don't seem to be getting better. Yes, there is an awakening to who we are. There seems to be an awakening to who we are. But that's just knowledge of who we are. Because our people knew 2,000 years ago who we were. But yet and still ended up in captivity. We're still disobedient, stiff-necked, and crucified the Messiah. Still hating on the Messiah, wanting to stone him, bearing false witness against him, seeking to kill him. Our people. So knowing who you are doesn't mean a thing. That doesn't equate to righteousness and holiness. It just means you know who you are. But still follow after the same patterns of unbelief and sin. So the message for today, family, is be careful who you help, because the very people you try to help will hurt you. Shalom.